The following is a production of Medfield TV.
All right, good evening and welcome to the Board of Selectmen meeting, the open session for Tuesday, October 30th, 2018. As always, disclosing this meeting is being video recorded. We will begin by taking a moment of appreciation for our troops serving in the Middle East and around the world. Thank you. We also extend our sympathy and condolences to the family of Bob Sylvia. Bob served the town as a member of the Zoning Board of Appeals for over 35 years, a member of the Bylaw Review Committee, and a term on the Warrant Committee. And finally, we extend our heartfelt sympathy to the families and friends of the victims of the attack at Pittsburgh's Tree of Life Synagogue. All right. We have a relatively short agenda for tonight. I think we'll start with our action items. We tried to limit the agenda, both in light of last night's town meeting, so everybody can get out of here at a reasonable hour, just to those items that we had to deal with this week, and everything else will be pushed over to our agenda for our next meeting on November 6th. So we'll start with the request to sign the MSBA Dale Street Elementary School Study Enrollment Certification. And just a little background for viewers at home. As you probably know, the town has been accepted into the MSBA school building process with respect to the construction of a new Dale Street school. As part of that process, the state analyzes and assesses what our likely enrollment trends are going to be, which affects essentially the amount of money the state would be willing to provide, or the size of the building the state would be willing to fund. As the state funds 40% of the building costs, they assess what they think the likely enrollment will be, and then they'll figure out, they'll pay for a building that's kind of within what their projections are. And so we've received from the town their projection, the state's acceptable projections for school enrollment. So any questions, comments, or discussions? Yes.
I actually did have, but this is not a question about whether we should approve this. It's informational, so I don't know whether you have the answers. The one thing that really caught my attention was the increased projection of increased enrollment, only because we've gotten a projection from the state several years ago showing that towns like ours, basically all the suburban towns, are aging, and I was just curious whether the state had changed its outlook for what the population trends in towns like ours are, to account for why they thought the student enrollment was going up, but I'm not sure.
So I can
know the answer.
I've had a couple of conversations with folks about it, and I think Christina has as well. I think the reaction from the members of the building committee who were there were surprised that the state actually came back with a higher number. Typically, the town wants a higher number because they want to build in room for growth, and the state pushes back because they want to make it cheaper. But based on their assessment, one of the metrics that they use to assess likely enrollment growth is the ratio between kindergarten enrollment and births. And just the nature of Medfield is we have a big jump from birth to kindergarten. And so I think where we are in the cycle, when you do that, the way they do that analysis, it leads to a higher projection. I think their projection puts us kind of back to what our historic peak capacity has been, around 2026 or 2027.
Say that again, Mike.
Around 2026 or 2027, if you have it there. You don't have that one.
Yeah, I don't have that one in front of me.
That's their actual projection.
The one that says
Yeah, but you have the attachments, and I looked at them electronically, the attachments to that email that has the future projections. In any event, they projected a higher number, kind of 10 years out than we had been projecting. And Christine, I think you had some insight.
That was similar. So they actually called us into MSBA to have a meeting about it because, and just like Mike said, normally they are trying to get towns to cut that number down, and that's a conference call, but they wanted to come in and explain to us about the ratio and that they were actually recommending a higher number.
So the way this is written up, though, it sounds more like it was additional information the town presented and a request from the town to use a 20-year projection rather than I'm not arguing with any of this. I'm just trying to understand it. It said that because the town requested that they base the projection on a 20-year outlook rather than a 10-year outlook, that bumped the numbers up, which kind of, I'm hoping we're building schools with expected life of greater than 20 years, so I don't have a problem with it. The real reason I was curious about it had to do with that earlier state study that made it, projected that towns like ours were going to be aging. And I'm sitting there saying, well, if you think that the student enrollment is going up, that would suggest to me maybe that's not true. So I'm actually more interested to know, to think about whether I should view this as having any relevance whatsoever to what our projected population in town is going to be in the coming years. That's what's really behind my question.
I think the additional data we provided was in regard to Medfield State Hospital, and that's why they were looking at a longer 20-year, but there was the MSBA decision to look at the 20-year versus the 10-year. And based on our, the analysis.
They did that at our request in this. I'm not arguing with it, I was trying to understand. Okay, answered my question.
Yeah.
Thank
There's a
you.
difference between the births and the kindergarten enrollment than people who are moving into town with the children for the schools, apparently.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
that's always been true. Like, we've always had a very high birth to kindergarten enrollment ratio. And some of it, it kind of depends on whether the people moving in, if it's the first child in kindergarten or the third, because that ratio gets tighter. People move in and then, their kids might have been born here, but, you're not adding actually additional kids, so. All right, any other discussion?
Motion?
Motion.
I move that we authorize Chairman Marcucci to sign the MSBA Dale Street Elementary School Study Enrollment Certification.
Second,
All in favor?
Aye.
yes.
All right, and so the next action item relates to the Verizon contract for the water tower, the long-awaited lease agreements on the water tower. I'm sure all Verizon subscribers in town will look forward to this happening. As with all Verizon matters, I will be recusing myself, and so I shall do that now.
I'm a Verizon user, but I won't recuse myself on that basis.
Sorry, none of us can approve this for all.
So I'll move that we vote to sign the lease agreement between the town as landlord and Cellco partnership, DBA Verizon Wireless, as pertains to the cell tower to be installed on the Medfield State Hospital site water tower.
I second the motion. All those in favor? It passes.
I think one of you will have to sign
Yeah.
on behalf of the board.
Get back to you on that.
This is all, how many spots do we have to sign?
There's a lot,
You might want to wait till the end of the meeting.
yes.
Here for an hour signing all that. So,
We have time.
yeah, we'll just have to put, I don't know if we have a stamp or something to just cross out my signature block so they know that I just didn't sign because I recused myself, not that I'm objecting to
Oh, wait a minute, who's got to sign this?
you and Pete. It's got, look at that, 3 signatures.
We should have had a debate.
On those pages.
And I have to notarize your signatures, so I'll have to see identification.
Okay. All right,
They found me out.
so we have 2 discussion items on. I suspect that 50% of our attendees here tonight are here to talk about signs within the public ways and not the other item.
Both are interested. Both are interested.
Interested in both and came down to answer any questions.
Okay, well, let's start, just in case you lose interest in the other topic during the discussion, or would like to leave. Let's talk about signs within the public ways, which I think was prompted by an email from Mr. Temple. So, Gus, do you want to kick this one off?
So, well, to be honest with you, there were 2 things that prompted me even putting this on the agenda. The first thing that prompted me was your email that provided the picture of what the South Street Route 27 intersection looked like, and that's this one. And my reaction to that was that, A, that's a complex intersection that we've actually talked about putting lights in on, so my first reaction to that is, so that would be a place that we would clog up, put a lot of signs. That was point 1, and I believe it's one of the authorized locations, so it's not like it's a road location, but as I look at that, I think I put one question on the table: is that actually a good location to put signs, given just how hard it is for people to get out? Basically, nobody at that intersection should be busy reading signs on the corner. The second reaction I had, the other thing that caught my attention was after I left the transfer station 2 weeks ago. There's always signs there, and we authorize those signs. But there was one sign from Powasset Farm, and I like Powasset Farm, and I like what they do, but there was a sign there at the entrance to the transfer station. And I said, I am sure that the selectmen have never approved Powasset Farm's Oktoberfest or Fall Fest celebration, so there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that I kind of said, well, there's another place where I think we have a sign that's going up that had nothing to do with us. This picture prompted me to say, you know, if these are all authorized signs, then the one thing the selectmen haven't been doing is we routinely approve signs, is we actually haven't been keeping track of how many signs we're putting at how many locations for how long. Because these signs, I think this many signs is a safety issue, and beyond that, you can't read them because some are blocking others, so it's not even an effective place for signs. So, kind of
the roof of the car there.
yeah. What I couldn't tell from your picture, David, I'm sitting there saying, gee, if I was in a car, I think I could see more than that, but I don't know if you were standing or you're on a bike. You were in a car.
I do not have an SUV.
So one of those low-slung roadsters, maybe.
Were you in the lane, the left turn lane? Is that where you were?
Yeah. So anyway, point taken, that looks to me to not be a particularly safe situation, and more importantly, as an authorized location, I'm not convinced that's the ideal place to try to get people to read as they either whiz by or are trying to see if they can find a break in traffic. So I'll throw that out. I was more looking for a discussion today, not necessarily decisions, but that was the reaction I had to
I
that.
went and took a look at it, and I found that when I was stopped at the intersection, I was in the right-hand lane, I could see over the signs, and
Yeah.
so that I could see the traffic coming from downtown Medfield. But I agree that that number of signs is an issue. I wonder if whether the sign should be pushed back farther so that your line of sight to the right is not affected as much.
And plus, I'm
I
just
don't know.
wondering whether we as Board of Selectmen need to kind of, one way or the other, keep track of how many signs we're authorizing.
Well,
and how many
yes, and that's always been
locations.
sort of one of my gripes, is that there are a lot of signs, as you, I think, brought up the other night, that are not approved. And I don't know about the one that you were citing or not, but there are plenty of signs that get put on the pole across from the Shaw's exit that people are just, college hunks are going to move furniture for you type of thing. And there's nobody in town that's really charged with picking those off. And I would suggest that we assign that task to either the police or the DPW as they drive around town to know what are the authorized signs. And I mean, it'd be very easy to produce a list of them. And
Evelyn, can I ask you a question? May I ask you a question? Yeah. So when we approve the sign requests, when you keep them in a file, how do you organize them? Because it seems it would.
I don't keep them in a file, they're part of the record.
Part of the record, okay.
And those folders for
Okay.
each meeting.
So, because I think it would be useful if we could do it without creating a massive, maybe we can use some functionality of the website to keep track of what we've authorized for each period.
and
Because I
just have
think-
an Excel spreadsheet maybe.
Yeah,
that
or even if you
add
could have the
on.
web, it would be great if you could do this without creating a huge amount of work for you, Evelyn, or somebody. It would be great if someone could go on the website and click and see, like, what are the authorized signs right now, right? So you know if it's an authorized sign or not. The police or DPW would know which ones, have easy access to which ones have been authorized. And then I think it would be helpful kind of to this issue, not that we want to be picking and choosing between the requests, but the requests come in at different periods. So we may get a request in May to post signs in October for lacrosse signups. And then you may get over the course of the summer 5 more requests for that same week, but we don't have visibility which ones we've already approved, how many we've approved. And I don't know, I'm sure Mark would be, if Mark were here, he'd be saying that it's a huge hornet's nest to limit it or pick or whatever and whatnot. That's not what I'm saying. But I think as an initial matter to understand how many we're approving, and then we can get a sense of, okay, this is the slots we have. And if it is, again, I don't want to create a huge amount of work on signs, but at least to know, well, gee, we've got 15 signs approved for that period. Do you really need that one for that extra period? Ms. Sullivan, you have a question. But you need a microphone.
Oh, excuse me,
You need a microphone.
this is so rare.
This is 100% participation from our audience
Go,
tonight.
there you go.
After you've asked one question, we need you to move to another chair, so it
Okay.
seems like there's a lot of people here on TV.
No problem, I see some vacant chairs. No, my observation about it is, and I did send an email to Gus about this today, is first of all, I don't think there's a lot of awareness in town that there is a sign bylaw. I think there's a lot of groups and organizations that are all about, we want to put our signs up, but they don't realize that there are guidelines. So that's my first suggestion, is it should be more aware, that it exists, because there's a lot of people that don't know that. Secondly, some of the ones that do know that, I believe within the bylaw it says you have 2 weeks, and a lot of people put them up and just leave them there for a much longer time. So that's another piece of, if you're going to do some sort of a spreadsheet or some sort of a schedule or calendar, that's kind of an important piece of it. They might put them up on time, but they may not take them away after the 2 weeks. And I'm also thinking about that picture that you took, and part of it is, I don't know how you all decided on the 5 locations, approved locations, 4 or 5, but I think the whole point is you want them to be visible where cars have to stop. And so that seemed like it was off the road enough. It was not in anybody's front yard, because I've seen some signs in people's yards that aren't probably supposed to be there. They're not the people that live there. But that's another story. So, I think that the location in that particular case that David's concerned about isn't bad. But like you say, maybe it's just at this particular time is just more than, needed to be there.
Many times they will put up signs saying enrollment period October 1st to October 31st, or a month or two, and certainly I wouldn't expect that when you're approving a sign that you go back and say how many more we got down there already, but it's very common that any organizations in town will have this prolonged sign up. I didn't know that. Yeah. But the original sign bylaw, which was passed in 2004, was not aimed at this, but more just the idea of junking up the town with a lot of signs that I have always regarded as vertical litter. And I remember that it was something that bugged me when it came up, and I was at the town meeting, and I thought, aha! And there was widespread applause for when the measure passed by essentially a unanimous vote. I don't think, and it puts the burden on the police department. I sent you I copied the bylaw, yeah. And it's really for any sign in a public way, and the public way does not end at the pavement. It usually goes a few feet in, and of course,
so if you're public safety,
yeah, I'm thinking that, and plus the idea of just junking up the town with all these signs. And I'd like to see it in full.
Limited is 5 locations.
Yeah, but I mean, but the other signs of the college hunks and whatever.
We don't have control of those.
What?
We don't have control.
Well, the bylaw says that they're not supposed to be there, and there's a $25 fine, which I bet no one has ever paid. I must confess, I once rode my bicycle on the sidewalk, and I didn't pay a $25 fine, even though that's in violation of a bylaw.
You will collect that at 7:45.
Yeah. You be careful, you could be paying that. That was the only other thing I was going to say. I don't think, this is just separate, I believe, than the signs you're talking about, right, Pete? That the ones that people hang on posts, and this sign bylaw is mainly for the sandwich boards. That's really the location,
Right.
the definition of those, so it's a
There
different.
are a lot of other signs in town that aren't at the
Correct.
5 locations.
Right.
So I would suggest a couple of things. One is that we have somebody look at the locations where we have them. I suggested once that we have there's a huge swath of lawn along North Street. For some reason, Billy McCarthy built North Street extra wide, and I thought that maybe that would be a good place to have signs along, in the grass along there. The other
Down towards Harding Street?
yeah, down before Harding takes off. The other thing that I've suggested to Mike Sullivan was that, the selectmen don't need to approve the signs. The town administrator could say yes or no to the signs. It's not really, it gives the group some mention at the meetings, but the way that we do it now
Consent, yeah.
we don't mention
Yeah.
who's getting the sign, so that we used to actually mention their events and so that they got a little bit of publicity for their events, but that's not happening anymore. So I'm not sure that it's important that they come to the selectmen at all.
I agree.
And I think that from this kind of issue, right, the town administrator is in a better position, or his or her designee, to sort out the specifics of what's there and if it's an issue rather than, because I think there's some issue. If the selectmen have authorized it, I can imagine the town administrator says, well, if the selectmen have authorized it, I'm not going to go take it down, right? Or if they did take it down, say, what is it? We have a license to do it.
Well, and I think that, if the town doesn't really care, then, and that's what we've sort of shown over time, because we don't really enforce it, then maybe we shouldn't be bothering with telling people they need a license.
Right. But there's probably
But if we
ways to
do care,
it.
then we should create a little mechanism for some enforcement. I don't think it has to be very, very difficult, but I think that the DPW or the police officer riding around just needs the list for that week of what the signs are, so that when they stop at North and Main, they can look over and are those on the list? Oh, yeah, okay.
One other point, if I may, on the one at North and Main, in front of the Juice, those signs, the sandwich board signs there could easily conceal a child behind them so that a driver turning right might not see them. And the kids may not always think.
Hopefully the child would be at some.
Well, yeah, but I mean, this is there's a serious accident potential there. I don't know that there has been one, but I think you'd agree that having a kid behind the sign when someone's making a right turn is potentially a dangerous situation.
I kind of like the way that Dover does it. They just seem to string up banners on some poles in front of the town hall.
Yeah, Sherburne does it sort of on that green there in the center by 16. There's a million things up there, same thing, banners and signs and all the rest of it.
My reason for bringing it up was not the counter, even the point you're making, David, is that there's organizations in town that are running events, and there's only a few ways you can publicize them. So I wasn't trying to have us find ways to restrict information, but I think some of the things like the picture you took, I think is neither a good idea for a difficult intersection nor a good idea for signs, because I actually blew it up on my screen to see if I could recognize what they said, to see if I could remember whether we'd approved them, and I can't read them. And then there's some behind the ones I can't read that I really can't read because they're behind a sign. So they're doing nobody any good anyway. So it was more partly public safety and partly realizing that if that can happen because it's all authorized, then our process isn't very good.
Right.
There's one other dimension to this that I'll raise, and again, this is not with the goal of trying to promote enforcement, but when you leave the transfer station, you go by where Sluggers Academy is and the Seventh Wave Brewing, there are a number of these kinds of signs right there at the entrance. I don't have a problem with that because I would like to do everything we can to promote business in our town, and if that's the only way that the businesses that are off the road down that hill can let people know they're there, I don't want to have that go away. But I was wondering whether it's because do we have restrictions? If I had a business, I might want to put up a nicer looking sign than one of these little plastic tent things, if I could. And my question is, do we actually allow that, or is effectively?
Then you have to go through the full sign review bylaw.
Okay.
So that's different than just a little sandwich.
It would make actually sense for that location to have a directory out at the street, I would think.
Well, yeah, ideally it's a sign, like, I'll pick Seventh Wave Brewing. If they didn't have that sign there, nobody would know where they were.
Yeah.
So that's the only way.
So the sign that I'm thinking of that they need is the one at Shaw's Plaza. I think the sign at the Shaw's Plaza for the Shaw's and whatever, Blue Moon and the other group, Marshalls is, I mean, it's fairly discreet, it's not huge, but it's informative, it gets you what you need to know.
Or out where that is, I don't want us to get into re-engineering sign bylaws, but I mean, I could see an artistic wooden sign that looks like it would be a, you know.
Granite posts, it's got to have granite posts. That's the Medfield system.
Point made. I'm not trying to get those off. I want them to be able to keep it up. But my point was, if there was a more effective and attractive way that a business could let people know that it's where it is when it's set off the road like that, and if that business wanted to do that, because it would cost them more money than a plastic, prop-up sign, my real question was, have we made it hard for businesses to do that, or is it something we can make it
So
easier?
If memory serves, I believe Park Street is an example.
Yeah,
The
Park Street
Park
is the other. I was just
Street
gonna mention
businesses
Park.
wanted a sign for many years.
I mean, Park Street needs some sort of directory that's down on Main Street for those
Yeah.
businesses. And
That is a good example. Same thing, absolutely.
And they're not allowed off-premises signs under the sign bylaw.
See?
And there's nothing in the private way, there's no room in the private way to put a sign there, so they would have to get permission, and then they're violating the sign bylaw.
Well, so I threw this up for discussion, and rumination. This general sentiment is if there's something that we can do that would make it easier for businesses to let people know where they are and attract business, I think that's a good thing.
So can we put on our Board of Selectmen action item list? We love that list as an item for the town administrator to look at, how we do our sign approvals, how we keep track of this stuff, and make a proposal. At some point, I don't think we need to put a, next week on it, but if there's a website-based solution or technological solution, and then how we deal with these kind of enforcement questions going forward, if there's a way to make the process a little smoother, if we could have a calendar on the website, and then maybe, Pete, if we had a calendar on the website, that would provide a little bit of publicity for the groups, right? Because there's probably a way, again, without a huge amount of work for somebody, that if you have the sign approved, whatever's on the sign could be on the website, and you could have a little scrolling thing of groups or what have you. I don't know, that would just kind of work that in, and you might get some more publicity there than you get from viewers of the selectmen meetings or readers of our agenda. Which is probably not the best source of information.
But if you have an accident at that intersection next week, this will be much higher priority.
That is true. That is true. And I think,
This is you, David.
well, I will let you know, Dave,
know it's set up.
that, in light of this picture, we will be turning this over to the police for a texting while driving investigation. Just kidding. Yeah. Right.
Because it looks to us like this is a bicycle on the sidewalk.
No, in the car. And I just kind of,
You got proof?
And he wasn't using his phone. It was on a tripod in the passenger seat.
I just assumed he was wearing a GoPro, but okay.
CN drivers have rights just as much as SUV drivers.
That is true. That is true. All right. Anything else on that? All right, so our final discussion item is discussion concerning Assistant Town Administrator position and organization and structure of town administration upon the appointment of Christine Truweiler as Town Administrator. I think for this, we wanted to hear from Christine, what her thoughts are on how to do this with sort of the turnover coming up imminently in January. If we could, ideally, we'd fill the open slot so that we're not sort of one person down for too long as we sort of head into the throes of town meeting season. I thought it would make sense to have this topic at a meeting now to give us a couple of months for, as you put the job description together and post it and all the rest of it, to kind of give us a shot of having that person in place in January when Michael retires. So I will turn it over to you, Christine.
So one of the things I've been thinking about is, while I have been here for 20 years, it is a new position. I would like to bring in an assistant town administrator who has prior experience being an assistant town administrator or within an executive office, who has some generalist municipal background. I don't want to bring somebody in from the private sector. I'd like to bring somebody in who understands, because I'm not going to have the ability to train them on everything like Mike had with me. Mike was already comfortable in his role for, almost 20 years by the time I got here. So that's what I'm envisioning. I would also, when Mike advertised for my position, he was looking for somebody who had planning background, which wasn't his strong suit. I'd be looking for somebody who had some involvement in municipal finance. It could be a finance director that's would like to move up to an assistant town administrator position who understands how the budget process works. And trust me, all of these are just suggestions. I would like to meet with all of the department heads for their ideas and input as well. I don't want anybody to think that my mind is made up on it. But I would also, and I did talk to Dr. Marsden today about not focusing on somebody who has human resources experience. I think we have a tremendous HR director up in the school department, and I would like to see if the town and the schools can work together. We're very small compared to the schools, about 150 people. What you do for 650 in the schools, you have to do for the 150 for the town. So I think we can have some cost savings rather than having a separate HR person on the town side. So Jeff and I and Michael LaFrancesca will have some conversations about how we would structure that as well.
Right, just for viewers at home, that you have been our HR person. So
Yes.
We're talking about not having a separate HR person, meaning the HR portion of your role as assistant town administrator would not necessarily be part of the next assistant town administrator's portfolio. You'd have an HR person for the whole town who would be
Correct.
the person who's currently in the school.
And then you have me as the town administrator who has human resources background, who can utilize that in the office and not have to have duplication of efforts in both offices, so it should be good.
Okay.
There are other smaller department changes that I envision, but again, I'd like to talk to the department heads about before we make any of those changes and get their input on any of that as well.
Do you have a proposed job description for the assistant town administrator? How would you, if you're advertising the job, what would it say? And you have something written up?
I've pulled a few out that some towns have advertised recently, and I'm sorry, I should have made a copy for you tonight. A lot of them are generalist. You're looking for a general municipal person with a financial background is basically what you're looking for. Somebody who's got experience in budgeting, collective bargaining, your basic municipal functions.
Because as we know, that at least in recent years, the assistant town administrator here is sort of the answer to the question of who do you call on this new issue that is the assistant town administrator, right? And so we don't have a separate department for each function that you perform.
Correct.
Thankfully.
So there's been some delegation of things. Today, I delegated Tree City USA to Mogule. He will now run the Tree City department, not me. Although I'm still going to that conference. There's a few other little things. I've been the designated procurement officer. I have asked Matthew Violet to become a certified procurement official so that those duties can be shared when I'm not available with him as well, so that we have two of us certified in the building.
Mm-hmm.
You'd retain the procurement
Correct.
officer
Yes.
responsibility.
Yeah.
And do you have thoughts on how we would the advertised salary for the assistant town administrator, would that be based on experience, or what kind of a range would we give? Like, how would that be?
I need to meet with the personnel board to talk with them
Okay.
about that first. There is a range in the book, but we may need to go slightly higher depending on the market. We would need to look at the market, and I'll talk to them about that.
Okay. And then do you have timeline? Like how long do you think it would take to get something posted, or?
I think we can post by mid-November. I'll have the personnel board call a meeting and we can start working.
I mean, this is not to cut short the discussion, I'm just trying to get a sense
Yep.
of just process-wise, and, all right. Then there's another question is, do you have a proposal on what the process would be for finding this person?
I would think this person is going to work primarily with you as the Board of Selectmen and the department heads, so I would most likely do what we've done with other department heads and form a committee, and I usually do that internally with my department heads, and then the person would come for a final interview with the Board of Selectmen. We have done a few in the past where the Board of Selectmen sit in on the interview process, but then it's a little difficult because you're recommending to yourselves,
Right.
and you're one of 3 votes, so.
Right. Do you have, before we get into the substance, do you have, Gus, Pete, thoughts on the committee process? Pete?
I think it makes sense to do it the way Chris talked about. I don't think the selectmen should be involved, actually.
You don't, or you do?
I don't.
Don't. I have a slightly different angle. Not so much
do
that.
too.
Yeah, well, no, I'll tell you what my first reaction to the question you asked, Mike, is, Christine, you're stepping into a new town administrator role, so you're stepping into a new role. So my first inclination is that the process should be heavily weighted toward the person that you think you want as your assistant town administrator. I wouldn't mind, I think it's a great idea to have that person interview with the town department heads to give you feedback on whether they feel like that person can do a good job. But rather than having a committee decide who you need, my inclination is to let you decide who you need. Yeah, we'll be interested in seeing who that is as well. But I would, personally, I'd be inclined to give you more direct control over that.
So that's kind of my approach as well. I mean, the way I was thinking about it was you would be the committee, and kind of if you're going to have them interview the other people, and then I do think we should interview the person or understand kind of who you're choosing and who understand who the candidates are, just so we kind of know what the pool is, and to the extent that it comes down to two, and you have two that you're equally comfortable with, and you want us to kind of weigh in on that. But I agree with Gus. I think that, I mean, this is your assistant, and this is someone who, in some senses, is going to be kind of working with you in overseeing the various departments. And so I don't know that having a committee review it in the first instance is going to get you the person who's going to be the best fit for you. Obviously, it's got to be somebody who can deal with us. Probably harder for that than somebody that we can deal with.
Yeah, bad nights.
Right.
I would say that if you narrow it down to a set of candidates that you think are qualified, not to have us decide, you would decide, but I would personally be interested in seeing what the responses were, but that's more just to get a sense of what the pool was like. So that piece, just for informational purposes, I'd like to see.
And I think we typically do interview department heads finally before they're appointed. Yeah.
So I guess, based on your comments, I would just say that my thoughts about the committee is very much in line with what you guys were talking about. I thought that the committee was a tool that Chris would just use.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think it's part of the process if you want them to meet with all the department heads, but I wouldn't necessarily form a committee that has to take votes and.
No, I meant more just we don't actually vote as the committee, it's just more internal department heads and discussion about it.
The
But
bottom line is you're going to have to live with that decision more closely longer than anyone else, though.
Right. And from the town's perspective, I mean, 44 years from now, that person would likely be your successor as town administrator. So you want to keep that in mind as well.
Working longer than Michael.
they think I'm 20.
All right, Pete, questions or comments on what we've discussed so far?
No, I think that makes a lot of sense to go in that way.
Any other thoughts on the kind of the substance of the position or the type of person we'd be looking for?
Well, I mean, again, I would defer to Chris in terms of what she wants that person to be doing and the skills that she wants. And you may learn a lot, I think, when you meet people and talk to them, and your department heads may give you some very good suggestions as you talk to people too, so.
Sure.
I mean, it's putting together a team, so.
Yeah, I think just a couple of thoughts in general. I mean, when you sort of think about, and I think when we go through the process, we probably won't have a set of goals. Maybe we'll come up with a couple of goals just for the first 6-month period, and then we'll get into a normal annual town administrator goal cycle. But, I mean, obviously there are some to-dos kind of early in the process, and you don't want to pick the assistant town administrator just with those initial projects in mind. But I think certainly, we probably all agree that we need some work on our procedures and policies and organization of that. And so I would think somebody who had some of that experience in developing and pulling that kind of stuff together would be very useful. And then on the personnel side, I think you've got a good sense of what you want to do in terms of department heads and reviews and all that kind of stuff. But and you have a good handle on that. But just kind of thinking of those larger projects early on, having someone who can help you kind of in those areas. You probably won't be able to delegate the hospital entirely to whomever you hire, though, just as a warning. Putting in the job description, you must solve Medfield State Hospital is not.
It was in mine.
Right. Okay. And so I think it would probably make sense when you've had a chance to meet with the personnel board just for us to review the job description.
Absolutely.
The only thing on that is the timing. We're meeting on November 6th and on November 27th. So, I don't know if you'll have something for November 6th, if the 27th is too late.
No, we can do it on the 27th.
Okay.
That's fine.
And that'll give us enough time.
Yeah.
in that process.
I'd like to get it out at least by the beginning of January before we really get into the holiday season.
Okay.
So,
I mean, early December.
yeah, I'm sorry, did I? January,
Beginning of
December.
December.
Yes,
Right,
yes.
beginning of December. No, that.
Chris, do you think there's a big demand for, or a big group of people that are looking to be assistant town administrators?
Yes,
Okay.
there are.
In a fun town like this.
Absolutely. And I'm here. I have the privilege of serving on the Mass Municipal Personnel Association Program Committee, so I have access to some knowledge of who's looking to move and who's interested in those positions. So we should be able to spread the
By
word
the way,
about
when
it.
Gus and I went to the fall Mass Selectmen's Association meeting, the woman there from the MMA was very happy that you were becoming the town administrator. Devin, I think was her name.
Devin.
Yeah, she called you out by name, yes, she was delighted. I forget to tell you that.
She's great to work with.
I think she said the same about you.
May I have one suggestion on this? I used to be a corporate headhunter, and I've gone through, I've brought probably thousands of people into companies, and at a high level, especially, and this is a really significant position, and it's going to require somebody who's got very good people skills and as well as administrative skills. When I had a position like this that I was trying to fill, I would the person would usually say, "I'll give you 3 references," and I'd say, I know the problem trying to reach 3 references. I'd really like you to give me about 8 or 10, and they would usually kind of recoil, but might be negotiated down to 6 or 7. But the point is that when you're checking references, you never reach all 3 references. You need to have some backups. And the other thing, you can gain a lot of information from multiple perspectives. You can ask the references when you're talking to them, do you know anybody else that knows this person who might, essentially an authorized reference, but you're doing your own digging. I had an experience about 15 years ago. It involved a college president, and we didn't have enough references. I did some digging around. It made me, I sensed something wasn't quite right. I pleaded with him to call this reference that he knew himself personally, who would be more candid with him than the reference was with me. But he said, I haven't got time to do it. And he made the hire, and it turned, he got a lot of grief out of it. And the guy lasted maybe a year and get fired, and it was a bad situation. So that's my...
Is there a rule of thumb, Christine, in these on the number of references that?
So I find when I ask for professional references, similar to what David just said, nobody's ever given me somebody who's going to give them a bad reference. Everybody gives me, a good one. Right. So what I usually do is try and network with people that I know, especially where they're coming from a former town, to find out was there an issue while they were there. Sitting on the Mass Municipal, it's a very small network, so you know who's moved around and who hasn't moved around, and who's good and who's bad. So.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
there was one other discussion item. The water bill.
Yeah, we didn't, I don't know if we actually
Didn't make it onto the agenda.
put it on tonight's agenda.
Now, we do have a citizen comment procedure.
You want to be the citizen?
So if you'd like to utilize the citizen comment procedure to make a comment, we can't vote or make a decision or anything related to it, but you can make it.
I've laid out the case in the email, so when there is a further discussion of it, you may want to hear from the water board on it, I don't know.
We probably ought to hear from the water board on it. I mean, it's within their jurisdiction,
Yeah.
ultimately. Did you send the email to the water board as well?
No.
I don't know the answer to the question of whether we have any.
I haven't seen the
Well-
email, so I'm not.
Is it okay for us to discuss, without making decisions, I assume we can discuss this, seeing as it's been brought up?
Yes.
I think there's 2 issues. One might be what the mechanism would be for the water board, for the bill to get paid, and what the water board can or can't do, or what we can or can't do. And then there's the other question, which is the more important one, which is, so do we want to make sure the Historical Commission pays for their water and sewer? I'm sorry, society. I'm switching groups that I've had on my mind lately.
Just for the viewers at home, guys, do you want to give a little background on the?
Yeah, so the issue has been that the Historical Society, which uses the small building right adjacent to the library, which is a town-owned building, and it's actually the repository of historical artifacts from Medfield. It's, I guess I'd call it your headquarters, but you certainly run lots of wonderful programs, monthly programs, and the Unitarian Church and a number of other things that basically preserve and promote the history of Medfield. You have been given use of that building with kind of the understanding, I guess, that you're going to pay for its upkeep, the most recent of which was to pay for the replacement of the roof that has to be, or the boiler first. And I think you mentioned that you had replaced the roof before. So we basically have a group of volunteers who are trying to preserve Medfield's history, who have been given a building and actually have been given the responsibility for maintaining that building, who have also been billed, it seems to me, it must be to the tune of about $150 every 6 months for water usage with the associated sewer charge. And that balance is built up to $950. So the issue, I think, for us as a Board of Selectmen on the table is, do we really, given that this is a society that's already putting money into preserving a town building and to some pretty significant levels, do we actually really want to, I mean, there's probably a few different ways we could make adjustments here, but do we really also want to go after them for the water and sewer bill, given that they cover this other piece? That I think is kind of a decision for the three of us, or an issue for the three of us to consider. Then if we say yes, then we have to have some discussion about how that's going to happen. If we say no, then we have to have a discussion about the mechanics. Like I don't think the Water and Sewer Board can just say, okay, well, this is just a donation. I think that's where they're going to come from, is we can't do that. We have to actually charge for a water and sewer. So then the question would be, where does the funding for that come? So I think that's the lay of the land. Whether we can decide on that today, that's...
Right. I don't think we can't vote on it, say it's not on the agenda.
What brought it up is we have one sink and one toilet in there. The building is open about 5 hours a month, and we use about 400 gallons of water a year on it. Since the new meter was installed in 2010, and it was installed after I went to the water board before, and the water board administrator said, well, you must be using a lot of water. You've got a leak there. You can't possibly be using so little water. And then Tom Seeley went over, checked, found no leaks, and then put the new meter in, and the meter shows that we've used 3,200 gallons of water in the last 5 years. And that's being billed $100 and some odd dollars per.
It's a minimum bill. We charge a minimum bill.
Yeah, it's a minimum bill.
For whether it's 0 to 10,000 gallons.
Yeah.
So I have two reactions. Number one, from just a general way that all the organizations in town should deal with this. Ideally, we don't wait for an issue to grow to $950 and then have it land. So I'd much rather see issues come up sooner when they occur rather than be allowed to accumulate. So that's one piece. But the other piece is, I think the Historical Society plays an important role in making this town what it is, to preserve the history and the tradition of the town, to make sure that the people who live here understand that and are aware of it, and that the kids in town learn about it. I think to an extent that a lot of other towns, I think it makes a difference when kids understand what their town is and what it's been and why they ought to be proud of it. So from that standpoint, I think the Historical Society plays an important role. And I think it's more important than $950 in water and sewer bills.
Pete?
We're not making a decision tonight. It's just an opinion.
I think we should hear from the Water and Sewer Board.
There's a process in place, and I think we should need to let them in on the process.
Okay.
Right. So that was the three things I wrote down is, one, I want to hear from the Water and Sewer Board on this issue. Second, I want to understand from Mark or who
What's in the
decides this
lease?
question.
And what's in the lease?
And what's in the lease, who decides this question, right? It may be that the Board of Selectmen can't decide this question, the Water and Sewer Board has to decide the question. And we can decide if there's other ways to pay for it or however it works. And the other thing I'd also want to understand, and I think the Water and Sewer Board would want to understand, is how many other similarly situated
I was just going to
tenants
say, there's
can
some
make the same
impacts
claim.
of this.
Just to understand whether it's other town departments or other folks who have leases from the town or who get water
Dwight
from the
Derby
town.
House is in the same position.
Right.
School department?
And so I don't think we can make this, I mean, I don't think this is a judgment that, if it is our decision to make, which I don't know if it is or isn't, right now, we can't make it just sort of the basics. I would echo everything Gus says about the Historical Society. Terrific. But we have to understand the scope of the issue. It's got to be done fairly. And other organizations that we also like and also do good things have to be treated the same way. And we just need to know the scope of the problem. And so I think it's got to start. The Water and Sewer Board's next meeting is on November 20th. And so maybe this is something we can get on their agenda. I know Mark Sorrell is going to be at that Water and Sewer Board meeting because they have other issues, legal issues to deal with. This may be something that we can suggest to Bill Harvey that we put on the agenda for the meeting on the 20th. I think that's the first stop for this issue.
Yeah, the original, the grant, the will of Granville Daily specified that the library was to provide a space for the Historical Society. And this issue never came up when the Historical Society was in the library. They occupied what's now the periodical room until the town bought this, the Medfield Cooperative Bank, which is now the library annex. So in a sense, that further, I feel strengthens the case that we shouldn't have to do this. But we'll talk about it later.
I took note of that in your email. I thought that was a very telling point, that we, in some ways, have an obligation to provide you space.
Right. And I don't know if we had a town water system at the time of Mr. Daly's death, so it may not have been provided for. All right, anything else? I mean, our next meeting is next Tuesday, November 6th at 7 p.m. It is the annual budget hearing. But if we want to cover, it's not on the agenda, but we can cover a selectman report.
Could I just ask Mr. Temple a question, since he's here? And I have
Of course you
I
can.
have
Yeah,
a
that's
question about, the town owns a historic house up at the hospital, that first white farmhouse on the right is your, I understand that's a 1700s house?
Yeah, I don't know much about that house myself.
Oh, okay.
I know it comes up a lot. It comes up occasionally in discussion, but it's always included in a discussion of other things, and I can't comment on it.
I'm just concerned that the town owns a very valuable historic property, and that we haven't been paying attention to it. I saw the fire department there one day, years ago.
Anything further?
Nope.
Do you have a motion to adjourn?
So your next meeting is Election Day.
Next Tuesday, November 6th, 7 p.m. Vote, if you haven't voted, and come here at 7 o'clock, and you can vote every day at Town Hall through this Friday via early
You can only
voting.
vote once. but
Only
you can
once.
Vote once, any day.
Either any day this week at Town Hall or next Tuesday on Election Day, and our meeting is 7 p.m. on Election Day, November 6th. Annual budget hearing.
No further comments?
Nope, motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Your time.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, Dave.
The preceding was a production of Medfield TV.